Egypt denies Israeli media reports of plans to open the Rafah crossing for Gaza residents. GCC Secretary General Jassim al-Badawi affirms member states' stance on the Palestinian issue remains firm. And NATO foreign ministers meet on Ukraine and broader defense issues, notably without U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Eight p.m. here in Cairo, time for the news with me, Al-Hamalawi. Egypt's State Information Service has denied reports from some Israeli media claiming coordination to open the Rafah crossing in the coming days for Gaza residents to exit the territory. A senior Egyptian official confirmed that any opening of the crossing would follow U.S. President Donald Trump's plan and would allow two-way passage for both entering and leaving Gaza. Earlier, Israel's Channel 13 claimed that the crossing would open to allow some Gaza residents to travel to Egypt, coordinated with Cairo, approved by Israeli security and supervised by a European Union delegation, similar to the mechanism used in January. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati told senior German lawmakers in Berlin that Egypt remains a key supporter of Palestinian rights, including an independent state, and urged firm steps to stabilize the Gaza ceasefire. In meetings with Armin Laschet, chair of the German Bundestag's Foreign Affairs Committee, Abdelati outlined Egypt's efforts over the past 2 years, which he said culminated in the Sharm el-Sheikh peace agreement. He stressed the need to consolidate the ceasefire in Gaza and implement UN Security Council Resolution 2803 to address the humanitarian crisis. Abdelati highlighted UNRWA's pivotal role and called for sustained funding. He also praised the committee's contribution to Egyptian-German relations and said that he hopes for closer legislative cooperation after Egypt's upcoming elections. Hamas recovered a body on Wednesday in the Beit Lahia area of northern Gaza, preparing it for handover to Israel later in the day. Hamas announced the transfer would take place at 5 p.m. local time after Israeli forensic services determined that remains returned on Tuesday did not belong to either of the two final deceased hostages Israel expects to receive. The recovery and transfer of the last two hostages' bodies form a key requirement in the initial phase of the U.S. plan led by President Donald Trump aimed at ending the Gaza war. The 46th session of the Gulf Cooperation Council GCC Supreme Council convened in the Kingdom of Bahrain. The summit is chaired by Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa and attended by senior Gulf leaders, including UAE Vice President Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Oman's Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, Kuwait's Emir Sheikh Mish'al Al Ahmad Al Jabir Al Sabah, Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman, and Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman bin Jassim Al Thani, representing Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is participating as the summit's guest of honor. Bahrain's King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa affirmed that the security of Gulf Cooperation Council GCC states is indivisible during the opening of the 46th GCC summit in Manama. He emphasized the need to strengthen joint cooperation among Gulf states, noting that the GCC has succeeded in shaping an integrated development model that enhances global competitiveness. On Gaza, King Hamad highlighted the necessity of establishing an independent Palestinian state in line with international legitimacy, stressing the importance of completing the implementation of the Gaza peace plan. He said, "We seek to address regional issues, foremost among them the Palestinian cause." Gulf Cooperation Council GCC Secretary General Jassim Al-Badawi said that member states' positions on the Palestinian issue remain firm and unchanged. Speaking at the opening of the 46th Supreme Council session in Bahrain, he emphasized the importance of the Palestinian cause and called for ending the occupation and establishing a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Al-Badawi welcomed Saudi Arabia's efforts in leading international initiatives for a two-state solution and the outcomes of the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, urging all parties to adhere to a ceasefire in Gaza. He also highlighted that the security of GCC states is indivisible, citing Iranian missile attacks and Israeli aggression targeting Qatar as examples of threats to regional stability. Egypt has launched the 86th Zaid al-Izza convoy to the Gaza Strip, carrying thousands of tons of humanitarian and winter relief supplies, including more than 236,000 food baskets, over 22,700 blankets, more than 53,400 pieces of winter clothing, and over 12,600 tents. The convoy also includes nearly 1,000 tons of flour, over 3,700 tons of essential medical and relief items, and more than 1,000 tons of fuel to support basic services inside Gaza. More than 760 consecutive days, Egypt has maintained uninterrupted humanitarian flows through the Rafah and Karm Abu Salim crossings, coordinating with 59 countries, the United Nations, and international relief agencies. Since the start of Israel's war on Gaza in October 2023, at least 70,117 people have been killed and 170,999 wounded. In the past 48 hours, hospitals received the bodies, including 4 recent deaths and 13 wounded. Since the October 11th ceasefire, 360 people have been killed, 922 wounded, and 617 bodies recovered. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam stated that Lebanon is willing to engage in talks with Israel beyond security issues, but emphasized that these are not peace negotiations, noting that normalization is linked to a formal peace process. He defended the appointment of former Ambassador Simon Karam to the U.S.-led ceasefire monitoring team as politically sound and nationally supported, while criticizing Netanyahu for exaggerating Lebanon's intentions. The move, involving a civilian rather than military official, is seen as a measured concession amid U.S. pressure for direct talks. The UN General Assembly has passed a resolution submitted by Egypt declaring Israel's occupation of the Syrian Golan Heights illegal and calling for full withdrawal. The votes, 123 in favor, 7 against, and 41 abstentions. Israeli UN Ambassador Danny Danon criticized the UN as disconnected from reality. Israel captured the Golan Heights in the 1967 war and later annexed it, a move recognized by the U.S. but rejected by most of the international community. Over 30 settlements housing more than 25,000 Israelis have been built in the area, and Israel has also extended its control into the UN buffer zone following instability in Syria. NATO foreign ministers posed for a group photo during talks focused on the war in Ukraine and wider defense issues. But the gathering was marked by the unusual absence of U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Rubio skipped the Brussels meeting, leaving Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau to represent Washington, an exceptional occurrence for a key transatlantic forum where U.S. participation is typically seen as essential. NATO normally holds two formal foreign ministers' meetings each year, and it is exceedingly rare for the top U.S. diplomat to be absent. A similar incident occurred in 2017 when then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson initially planned to miss the April session, prompting the meeting to be rescheduled.
To look straight in front of you for a few seconds.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that while peace talks to end the war in Ukraine are ongoing, it is essential to ensure that Ukraine remains in the strongest possible position. Speaking to journalists in Brussels as NATO foreign ministers convened to discuss alliance priorities and security issues, Rutte emphasized supporting Ukraine both militarily and economically. He noted that the United States and European allies are providing crucial weaponry and that economic sanctions against Russia are being effectively enforced. Rutte also highlighted his constant contact with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his team, describing the ongoing coordination as totally acceptable despite Rubio's absence from the meeting.
Threatening Europe with war again, so...
I'm not going to react to everything Putin is saying. We have seen him in military clothes, dressed like a soldier at the front, but not at the front. It was quite far from the front the day before yesterday.
The Kremlin has said that President Vladimir Putin has accepted some U.S. proposals to end the war in Ukraine while rejecting others, and that Russia is prepared to meet U.S. negotiators as many times as necessary to reach an agreement. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov spoke after talks in Moscow between Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, along with Jared Kushner, which continued into the early hours of Wednesday. A Kremlin aide said that compromises have not yet been found. Peskov emphasized that it was the first direct exchange of opinions on the proposals, noting that accepting some and rejecting others is a normal part of negotiations. He also praised Trump's political will to continue seeking a resolution for a peaceful settlement in Ukraine. Kremlin aide Yuri Yushakov said that peace talks between Russia and the United States over Ukraine were constructive and meaningful, but did not produce a compromise. Speaking after Russian President Vladimir Putin met with U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Yushakov noted that territorial disputes remain one of the most difficult issues. The discussions, which lasted 5 hours, focused on the essence of U.S. draft proposals for a peace plan, with Putin agreeing to some points and criticizing others. Yushakov added that the talks were confidential and U.S. representatives will report back to Washington before continuing further contacts. He stressed that the process has neither brought peace closer nor pushed it further away, emphasizing that there is still a lot of work to be done in Moscow and Washington.
Обсудили содержание тех проектов, тех документов, которые...
Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan discussed Black Sea security with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Ankara, which maintains ties with both Kiev and Moscow, condemned the strikes on vessels connected to Russia that occurred inside Turkey's exclusive economic zone in the Black Sea. The incidents have driven up regional shipping insurance rates and prompted Turkish firm Biskates Shipping to suspend Russia-related operations due to safety concerns. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Washington has made some progress in shaping long-term security guarantees for Ukraine, while stressing that unlimited American funding for the conflict is not realistic. Rubio said that current U.S. efforts focus on securing assurances that Ukraine will not face future invasions and can rebuild and grow economically. He added that future agreements must balance what Kiev can accept and what Moscow will agree to. Rubio emphasized that the United States remains engaged because it is uniquely positioned to broker negotiations, saying that President Donald Trump is the only global leader able to speak with both sides. He also argued that neither the U.S. nor Russia can sustain the war indefinitely.
This continues to be a working process. I don't want to declare victory or finality here. There's still some work to be done, but we are much further ahead today at this time than we were when we began this morning.
The Louvre unveiled renovated galleries showcasing 17th and 18th century Italian and Spanish paintings, including works by Baroque painter Bartolomé Esteban Morello. The museum also opened its new gallery of the 5 continents, designed to foster dialogue between cultures, featuring over 200 sculptures from Africa, the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Oceania. The gallery brings together pieces from the Louvre as well as collections from the Quai Branly Jacques Chirac Museum and the Guimet Museum of Asian Arts. Notable displays include a Rapa Nui Mwai head from Eastern Island positioned opposite an ancient Egyptian pharaonic sarcophagus. Hong Kong's deadliest fire in decades has claimed 159 lives, including an infant and a 97-year-old, as recovery teams continued searching the burnt-out apartment complex. Residents of the sole surviving block returned briefly to collect belongings, while hundreds living in temporary housing faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives. Investigators reported finding bodies on rooftops and stairwells, with some reduced to ashes. Of the 159 victims, 140 have been identified, 91 women and 49 men aged between 1 and 97 years, while around 30 people remain missing. Police have arrested 21 suspects on manslaughter charges, and Hong Kong's anti-corruption agency is probing possible graft linked to the fire.
Overseen by the Chief Secretary. So for sure that we will continue the work.
Floods and landslides across 3 provinces on Indonesia's Sumatra Island have claimed 753 lives, with 650 people still missing. Heavy rains since November 23rd caused rivers to overflow and triggered landslides, blocking roads, cutting power and communications, and isolating remote villages. Approximately 1.1 million people have been displaced in North Sumatra, West Sumatra, and Aceh provinces. Rescue teams from police, military, and search and rescue units are using helicopters, small boats, and temporary shelters to reach affected areas, though damaged roads and thick layers of mud have hampered operations. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia's inflation could reach 6% by December, with GDP expected to grow from 0.5 to minus 1% in 2025. Speaking at the VDB Investment Forum in Moscow, he also outlined plans to strengthen economic and strategic ties with China and India. Putin begins a two-day visit to India on Thursday to promote Russian oil, missiles, and fighter jets, aiming to restore energy and defense cooperation amid U.S. pressure. India, a long-time buyer of Russian arms and oil, is set to see its Russian crude imports hit a three-year low this month as it increases U.S. energy purchases. Putin will meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi, accompanied by Defense Minister Andrei Belosov and a business delegation. Ukraine's GDP warrants surged to their highest level in more than 4 years on Tuesday after Kiev unveiled a plan to retire the $3.2 billion instruments and replace them with a new rising rate bond, plus up to $180 million in cash for investors. The warrants jumped over 4 cents to 97.4 cents the dollar on the dollar, their strongest level since late 2021. Ukraine has been trying to overhaul the complex securities after they were excluded from last year's $20 billion sovereign debt restructuring. The core group of warrant holders is reviewing the proposal and will hold a webinar for investors, while urging holders not to vote until its formal settlement is expected by Thursday. Saudi Arabia has approved its 2026 budget, projecting a 165 billion riyals deficit, 3.3% of GDP, as it shifts spending towards industry and logistics to boost non-oil revenue. This is an improvement from the 245 billion riyals shortfall expected for 2025, driven by lower oil prices, reduced output, and a 4% overshoot in spending. While the budget offers limited detail on sector-specific goals, it sets a target of attracting more than 20 million foreign Umrah pilgrims in 2026, up from an estimated 15 million this year. Total expenditure is forecast at 1.31 trillion riyals in 2026, compared with an estimated 1.34 trillion riyals in 2025. Revenues are projected to rise slightly to 1.15 trillion riyals from an expected 1.1 trillion riyals this year.
التي انتهت بنفقات تقدر بتريليون و336 مليار.
China has emerged as the top contributor to the global box office earnings of Disney's Zootopia 2, highlighting the expanding influence and commercial power of the Chinese film market. As of 1700 on Monday, the film has grossed $818 million worldwide, with China accounting for $278 million, 33.9% of total global revenue. Experts say that the film's performance reflects a mature, open, and increasingly vital market for international cinema. Chinese audiences cite the film's high-quality animation, visual design, and engaging storyline as major draws. With demand surging, Zootopia 2 has dominated China's theaters, taking up nearly 83.3% of all screens as of Sunday. The The World Gold Council has revealed that global central banks made net purchases of 53 tons of gold in October, a month-on-month increase of 36%, marking the largest single-month increase so far in 2025. It noted that central banks in emerging markets such as Poland, Brazil, and Uzbekistan were particularly active in buying gold, highlighting gold's status as a strategic reserve asset. Since the beginning of the year, official net gold purchases have reached 254 tons, with Poland leading at 83 tons. The WGC surveys also showed that 95% of central banks expect to continue increasing their gold holdings over the next year. For her part, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated that this marked the dawn of a new era, one in which Europe would achieve full energy independence from Russia.
Today is indeed a historic day for our Union. Last night, we reached a provisional agreement on the Commission's proposal to fully phase out Russian fossil fuels. We're turning that page, and we're turning it for good. This is the dawn of a new era, the era of Europe's full energy independence from Russia. Many believe this would be impossible. Well, the figures speak for themselves, and let me give you some. Today, Russian gas imports, so LNG and pipeline, are down from 45% at the beginning of the war to 13%. Coal imports are down from 51% at the beginning of the war to now 0%. And crude oil imports are down from 26% to 2% today. I always knew that we could deliver with unity, with resolve, and by building on the extraordinary work of the past 3 years.
Oil prices climbed almost 1% on Wednesday after Russia said that talks with U.S. officials in Moscow failed to reach a compromise on a potential Ukraine peace deal that could have eased sanctions on its oil sector. Brent crude gained 0.7% to $62.91, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate rose 1% to $59.2. Both contracts fell more than 1% in the previous session. Gold prices edged up on Wednesday after weak private payrolls data reinforced expectations of a U.S. interest rate cut next week, while silver hit a fresh record high. Spot gold was up 0.1% to $4,209.31 an ounce after losing more than 1% in the previous session, while U.S. gold futures for February delivery were up 0.5% at $4,241.2. Silver edged 0.2% lower to $58.28 an ounce after touching a record high of $58.94. A Venezuelan zoo presented 2 white-lined cubs, marking a milestone in conservation efforts. The male and female lion cubs were born on November 26th at the zoo, native to South Africa's Timbavati region. The Panthera leo is known for its large size and distinctive white coat. The cubs' parents were rescued from wildlife trafficking in the Czech Republic and brought to Marcarai in 2022. Citizens of Aragua can participate in a social media contest to help choose names for the newborn lions. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, but before we wrap it up, here is a recap of the top stories making headlines this hour. Egypt denies Israeli media reports of plans to open the Rafah crossing for Gaza residents. GCC Secretary General Jassim El-Bidawi affirms member states' stance on the Palestinian issue remains firm. And NATO foreign ministers meet on Ukraine and broader defense issues, notably without U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. For more stories and live updates, you can always follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Q News EG. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching.